Good morning. So, for the last few days, or for the last few things I put up, I've been speaking about Trump and the potential positive, would we say fallout, or the potential positive consequences of the actions that he is taking, right? And the things that he talks about, particularly in relation to Ireland, right? But across the Western world. And I've been looking at it through the positive eyes, okay? So, being curious, right? And always wanting to be on the level and keep things balanced. It's also important to look at the potential negatives, okay? And you have these people out there, right, they will speak of Operation Trust, which is a psyop that was conducted in Soviet Russia, right, where you've total tyranny in the country and you're taking over. It's rout and corruption. The country's disintegrating. People want change. People want something different. People want the birth of the hero to come again, right? People want a life that is better for them. So this operation sought to cultivate the idea that there were agents in the background that were dealing with corruption behind the scenes, right? And therefore, there's no need to start a rebellion against the status quo because there's good guys in the background that are cleaning all of that stuff up, right? And this was done in Soviet Russia. And people would claim that, look, that's exactly what Trump is, and that's exactly what the Q movement thing is, and therefore you can't trust what Trump is doing because he's there fulfilling the same sort of role, right, but just more personified. That he's trying to get in. They've realized, and this is a fascinating thing, right, in America. So, US military conducted investigations and research into, like a war game, right, a scenario, to see if they could, foot to foot, overcome and take over America by force, right? And the results were that you probably couldn't, right? Because there's so many guns there, there's so many gun owners there, that it would just be an absolute guerrilla warfare. And the numbers that you're against as well are in probably 100 million of people that are gun owners and are willing to use those guns, right, against a tyrannical government, as is perfectly permitted in their constitution, right? So, if you've been into conspiracy stuff, right, which is just a simple way of looking at evaluating facts in a different manner, right? That's all it is. That's what conspiracy theory tends to be. People that evaluate the same set of facts in a different way, right? So some will evaluate what's going on in America as the stymieing or the stopping of the rot and decay of Western civilization, because we've been bombarded with stuff for decades and decades, and we are on a knife's edge as to whether Western civilization will continue, and Western people in a large degree will continue. And the whole Q idea is that there were white hats or good guys in the background who used an opportunity when the US military and the Homeland Security came up with like total surveillance, nearly the NSA, all that sort of stuff, right? Everyone was monitored, and these good guys decided, using their positions in the military and probably other positions, that we could use that against the bad guys, right? So not only are they spying on us, we have the ability to spy on them. And the whole idea is that they collected all of the blackmail material, all evidence of corruption from these public servants. They collated it, and now they just needed somebody who could act as the tip of the spear, right, to reclaim America and to get rid of the rot that was in there. And the story is that Donald Trump was approached to be that guy, and he accepted, and here we are, right? And he's fighting the fight for Western people, and there's a war going on in front of your eyes, right? That's one way of evaluating the facts, right? And you can look at different examples of the things that he's doing that would allow you to lean that way. However, we also must understand that what's going on here is not a new thing. It is highly sophisticated. There have been puppets, faux opposition, scapegoats, and propaganda, which has been utilized as long as man has been in contact with other men, right? It's war. And the idea of war is to, if it's not just to defend yourself, right, the moral war, right, or the justified war, it can be about conquest and taking over and colonization and expanding your sphere of influence and using every and any weapon you can to do that, right? Not just physical, spears, swords, guns, cannons, but also mental warfare, right? Because that is the best way of winning wars, when you don't have to fight them physically, right? Because you can colonize the mind of the people. You can begin to influence, manipulate, and propagandize people into thinking the same way you do, right? Fascinating things. And you can see examples of this in Ireland is a great example of that, right? Where all of a sudden the tens of thousands of years of human habitation in Ireland, how long, we don't really know, right? But we know it's at least 20, 30,000 years where you've had humans in Ireland, on Ireland. And all of thrown out the window, right? And people have begun to think like Roman people, at least Roman influence thinking, and English thinking, where we were just a bunch of bottom feeders and had no civilization, no rule of law. We were a bunch of barbarians. And then the English came and they built roads and they civilized us. And sure, Jesus, aren't we just unlucky that the Romans didn't get here to clean us up beforehand, right? Right. That's what I'm talking about, that sort of thing. Where we still abide by the English court systems and law systems, right? We use these things every day and never question the fact as to where they came from, right? Because we fought generational warfare in this country to not think the way we do now, to not abide by the laws and the court systems that we abide by now. We lost that war, okay? We stopped fighting it because we began to think like the oppressor, the colonizer, the enemy, right? So, back to the Trump thing. If we are dealing with, which we know we are, right, the Tavistock Institute, Wellington House, all of these organizations that were initially set up, if not just continuations of older branches, older organizations that just changed their name, changed the title, right? You can hide by changing your name, okay? And the history books will hide you very well. Even though, like, the principles that these certain bodies would be pushing are perfectly coherent with the next extension or organization that's pushing the same thing, but they have a different name. So history will tell you this is a new thing, and that stopped here, and then this began, but it's just a continuation of the same thing, right? And Wellington House and the Tavistock Institute, they were designed to encourage, manipulate, and convince English people to back the English military in getting involved in World War I. Because the English people, the average English person, was totally opposed to it. Right? They would declare their lineage as being German in degrees. Right? The Anglo-Normans and all that sort of stuff. Right? There's German tinge to that. So they would have had some sort of allegiance to their German brothers and all that on the continent. So the idea of going to war with them, that doesn't make sense. But Wellington House, Tavistock Institute, these places, these organizations, or the ethos in which these organizations ran, right, the principles that they pushed and promoted, was war. Number one, destroy the Germans, because they, probably more than any other European nation, have the ability to blow their influence out across Europe, right? They're a mighty people. They've always been a mighty people. They've never been fully conquered, right, until today nearly, right? So the idea was to destroy Germany, because Germany will stand in the way of total British expansion, right? And then you need to understand that the British Empire just went underwater, right? just went underground. It didn't stop. It didn't deteriorate, right? They still have their hand in all the international banks, drug problems, all that sort of stuff, right? So, convincing people, Wellington House, Tavistock Institute, public polls, using do you think England should fight against evil in a war? Yeah, therefore this person supports world war with Germany, right? This kind of thing. That's what public polls and that were developed to splash them back to people and say, look, most people say you don't agree with going to war, but most of your own people actually agree with going to war. And then people just go, all right, well, Jesus, okay, yeah, I can see it. Maybe. Yeah, okay. Right, this is how this stuff is used to manipulate people. Still to this day. So we know it's not like conspiracy thinking, right? It is conspiracy thinking because there's conspiracies going on, right? But the idea that conspiracy theory is faulty thinking in some way, it's not. It's just evaluating the set of facts we have in a different way, right? And more often than not, nowadays anyway, it tends to be closer to the truth than the mainstream, which would be the enemy combatant of the conspiracy theorist, right? Person who's evaluating the same set of facts and coming up with a different conclusion, right? But these organizations exist, right? The Committee of 300, John Coleman's book, these high elites, right? Who run things behind the scenes. You'd never see them on telly. Why would you? If you were in the position to dictate to nations, would you want your face and name being known? Absolutely not, right? So these people that hide in the shadows, these are ancient families. Some of them go back to the patrician families of Rome, right? The Dutch families, all these wealthy families, these Venetian families, these aristocratic English families, and even aristocratic Irish families. Take the Guinness family, for example, that sort of thing, right? These old families who, through intermarriage and their lineages, they maintain generational power over nations, right? And they pull the strings. And politicians then are just the distraction on the front, right? The mouthpieces for the policy of these powerful entities and people in the world, right? So we know that nations are manipulated with things, and you can take 9/11 as a great example, right? So the idea already decided upon that there was 5 or 6 countries that needed to be invaded and needed to be taken over, right? Libya being one of them, Iraq being another one, Iran top of the list, but pushed down to the back, right, for now, and some African countries, right? Syria being another one. So 9/11 happens. Osama bin Laden is accused of being the head, right, top dog in coming up with it and implementing it and acting it out, right? But yet Iraq gets invaded because they stated that there was weapons of mass destruction there and little jars of anthrax and stuff there. This all turned out to be lies, right? So we know that what goes on the surface only is used to serve the ideas that are already foundational or are already being occulted or hidden from public conversation, right? And people just go along with the surface stuff. So the same argument can be made that Donald Trump is exactly that. He is a surface, what would you call him? A ringmaster of a circus, right? The surface presence there to manipulate people. To echo in what? Well, to echo in what these organizations have always been pushing for, right? The Rhodes idea, the Cecil Rhodes idea of unlimited English domination of the world, essentially, right? And if you want to understand some of this, John Coleman's book is great on it. Carol Quigley's book, The Anglo-American Establishment, where he highlights the fact that England never really lost the war to America, right? They just lost the military campaign because they were all fighting on foreign soil against a massive force, right? And I'd throw into it as well, thousands and thousands, if not millions of Irish people were scattered in there fighting that too, right? And so England developed the banking system, right? And they used the banking system. They didn't develop it, but they cultivated it to work in their favour. They used the banking system And America has been enslaved to this Federal Reserve for about 100 years now, right? So that's what's going on there. So are we seeing a continuation of that? And one example to use that would be, number one question, what is Donald Trump there to do? Get gun owners on side. Because if you're wanting to implement the New World Order, and you see all these people talking about it, George Bush the Senior talking about it, Klaus Schwab talking about it, that von der Leyen thing in EU talking about it, they're explicit in it. They just don't give you the details of what that looks like and what that means. But you can infer it, you can pull it apart and go, yeah, in order for one organisation to control the world, many people will need to suffer, because many people will object to that, and these people will need to be pushed aside and eradicated, right? I think that's what COVID was. I think it failed. I think they moved on to another plan, or a continuation of another plan, or the same plan even, right? And I think that's where Donald Trump might come in. He will get all of those who are antagonistic towards government. He will get all of those who are super suspicious of previous forms of government and the culture that those governments promoted via NGOs, universities, the culture that these previous governments have promoted. They're skeptical of that. So they'll take a different route, but the destination may be the same, right? Which is total surveillance, total predictability of each person in the world, right? Or in their own nation states, right? And then all of a sudden, all countries decided to do the same thing. And so we're here anyway. We might as well put the stamp on it and call it, have a one world government, right? So Trump might be there to sway the more radically thinking people, or more human being thinking people, the people who are less susceptible to university and government propaganda, right? Which would be the gender stuff, the border stuff. And you can see that these conversations, it's funny to watch as well, because you find myself even going, yeah, right. So Trump comes out and says America are only going to recognize male and female. And people go, yes, victory. We're back at it, right? And given the current context of the state of where we are as human beings, it is a victory. But it's such a small threshold to get over, right? In order to get people on side, all that this guy has to do now, not all, but for him to come out and say that there's just men and women, people will declare him a leader of the Western world, right? So that's how far we've fallen as people, where these are the conversations we're having. That the argument over whether you should secure your borders is all of a sudden so big and massive that it drives a big schism down the center of human beings. That's crazy stuff. That's crazy. And while we're engaged in that conversation, there's 15 very serious conversations that are going on around the world and going on in our lives that need talking about. It doesn't mean that the border is not important. Of course it is. And we should have one. It shouldn't be a conversation, is my point. We should just have one. And in Ireland's case, we've a naturally given, God-given, nature-given one, right? We are a border. We're bordered. So the fact that the Western world is caught in this quagmire of stupid conversations about relatively meaningless stuff, and then you have a guy that comes along and just speaks the same way someone would have spoken 30 years ago. And because he has, through some of the decisions and the things he says, has pulled us, I said this a few times a while ago, pulled us back to where we were 30 years ago. We now go, yes, this is the guy that we need, right? So we're going to be more susceptible to accepting anything that he brings in, right? And one interesting thing is the border stuff, right? So how is he going to manage that? He's already mentioned the idea of basically digital identification, right? So everyone, you can see how this would work, right? If you're wanting to overcome the patriotic people of America or any country, you would force an invasion on them and get them thinking, of the preservation of themselves. Because when people are in fear of their lives, they'll take anything. It doesn't matter what hand is reaching down to you. If you're dangling off a cliff, you'll take it. Okay? Because that's a good thing and that's a necessary thing. But then underneath that, then you can bring in other stuff going, right, look, well, we obviously, not only do we need to stop who's coming here, but we need to be able to identify every single person that is here. We also need to maybe be able to identify and track everyone's movements so we can understand if there's people being snuck in or if there's people being kidnapped and brought away. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But what goes along with that? Right? What goes along with that is you become a marked, branded animal. Right? And you have signed yourself up for that potentially because you were promised something that was good for your life, which is the protection of your country and nation and people. Right? So you have to look at both sides of it. And you have to resist the desire to fall in on one side and stay there. You have to continuously assess and evaluate both sides of the story, right? Or both potentials in the story based on new things that come out, right? And what way it looks like it's going to flow. Okay? And there's also, I'll throw this in as well. I'll probably butcher it a little bit, but I'll give you the gist. The idea that there's a one world government, like, I suppose the connotation is that it's a negative and it's an inherently evil thing. But must it be? Right? Must it be? Like, government, we tend to judge government or evaluate the idea of government based on the government we have at the moment, right? And if the government we have at the moment is a wholly beneficent thing and it leads to lovely stuff for us and it leads to the total expression of individuality and it fights to assure the continuation of that, you would assess or the idea of government as being a positive, if not a necessity. And the same goes for the other way, right? So we might assess the idea of a one world government as being totally at odds with human beings. But what would we be basing that on? Would we be basing that on the idea that human beings are inherently tribal and conflict will arise and we can never get on with everyone, right? So in theory alone, is it a bad thing or a good thing? I don't really know. It could be a neutral thing. How it wishes to conduct itself and how would you say it? The restrictiveness or the rules, the obligations, the laws that it wishes to apply to the people in that system. That's where the problems come in, right? When you can't do this, but you can do that. That sort of thing. That's when the problems start to come in for me. But the idea of people being able to be identified by probably having a Neuralink thing or a chip in their hand or the digital ID stuff, right? Which they were pushing during COVID, and now it looks like Trump is starting to push that as well, but using not COVID and health as the stick to get you down the road with, or the carrot even, but patriotism, national pride, safety of your life and your family, and protection of your borders. That looks like it's now the carrot that's enticing people towards this digital identification, right? Or whatever way they're going to spin it, right? So is that bad in and of itself? It depends, right? It depends. Are you using all information? Are you open to all potential usages of these things? And are you making an evaluation based on that? And then is it an individual choice, right? Or are you going to be made do it? Are you going to be punished for not having it? Are you going to lose out on the ability, right? What? So just say everything goes Bitcoin or everything goes cryptocurrency. And the safest way of delivering cryptocurrency is to have this chip, card, whatever. So now you're kind of squeezed out of the market, right? Cash gone or not really accepted anywhere. That kind of thing. So it depends what comes after the initial heading that is given where the problems start, right? And then you can make the argument that, okay, because we're not given everything up front, we should just reject it wholesale and know the devil that we do and not enter into these uncharted waters, because we don't know if there's any way out of these things again, right? Perfectly rational to do that, right? And to think that way. But this is the thing I'm going to butcher. Jason Jorjani, Jorjani. If you haven't listened to any of his stuff or read any of his books, I would highly suggest you do that, because he would blow your mind to pieces in terms of looking at things in a different way, or introducing you to ideas and connections between ideas that you never even entertained for a second. So Jorjani, Jason Jorjani. Fascinating stuff. And he's into his philosophy, he's into nearly everything. He's a polymath, right? But his main field of expertise is philosophy, comparative religions, and philosophy combined with technology, right? So the philosophical understanding and exploration of man's use of technology, right? So he's looking at the singularity, right? The point where we have AI, which can filter and crystallize information quickly, right? How that is going to spur on or kickstart the exploration of genetic modification, right? Because AI can think probably cleaner than people. It puts morality to the side to a degree, and it will come up. It can evaluate nearly every piece of information that it is privy to, right? So he's suggesting that as we get into AI, as we begin to develop AI, automatically our ability to create genetically modified humans or to tailor humans' DNA is going to also increase and develop, which leads to more intelligent people using AI to constantly create new knowledge, right? Or discover new knowledge, right? And what he's suggesting is that AI will run into a problem because it's kind of semi-conscious, right? Because it works to do a task. It fulfills a task and it reports back. So in some way it's kind of alive, right? It's semi-conscious. And it is built on the back of the minds of people, right? So it can only do what it is programmed to do up until the point, right? So inside in artificial intelligence, man's intelligence is. So he's questioning and suggesting strongly that AI will begin to develop or to demonstrate some sort of telepathy. Because Jason Jorjani, he argues that very effectively as well, that man has that ability. Human beings have that ability, the ability to be telepathic. And you can see this in just straight empathy, mirror neurons, right? Where I recognize you as you're presenting yourself, and there's mirror neurons in my brain that take in that, the presentation you are giving to me, and my perception of you then is embodied in me, right? And we understand this as empathy, of putting yourself in the position of someone else, feeling what they're feeling. And it's not an intellectual thing where you just pretend that you're that other person. It is if you're around anyone who's depressed, and properly like depressed, heavy and black in their feeling, you feel that. It's tough being around someone like that. If you're around someone who lies, but you're not really sure if they're telling the truth or not because you don't have the full story, you feel that. That rattles your nervous system if you're around that too long. And you'll feel a need to get out, or I don't really want to be around them, because there's something off. And your nervous system is mirroring theirs, right? So telepathy is not much of a stretch then when we understand this, that we can read and pattern and mirror what somebody else is feeling without saying a word. They don't have to tell us how they're feeling, but our body will mirror theirs. Our nervous system will sync up with theirs, and we will begin to understand how they're feeling, right? So the idea of understanding or being able to take in someone's thoughts or put your thoughts into someone else's thoughts or have them think your thoughts, essentially, it's not too far of a stretch, right? Now, if this is the way that it's going, where, because Giorgiani's suggesting that this discovery that AI will begin to act a bit peculiar or whatever, right? It will begin to show signs of telepathy, of reading into things that in peculiar ways, right? But he's suggesting that that will kick open the door then for legitimate, serious study. And it's already there, but to bring it out to the mainstream, right? And to take it seriously and to grant it whatever funding that other areas of scientific discovery are privy to, of the parapsychology, telepathy, psychokinesis, all that sort of stuff, right? The ability or the power of the mind and the interconnectedness of the mind between people, right? So is there some foundational element that holds all these things together or binds all of these things, all of us together, right? So that exploration will have to come. And then he brings up a fascinating conversation, which is the ethical dilemma involved in that. So if it comes to be understood that man does have these latent abilities to be able to use telepathy, to be able to use remote viewing, which the CIA and different intelligence agencies and militaries across the world have spent billions on, right? The idea that you can put yourself into an enemy's base and look around, right? Fascinating. If we can cultivate that, first we recognize that it's a given, right? These abilities are in people. They might just be more dormant in some than others, right? Then we can start to teach it, accept it, understand it, teach it, and develop it. And that sounds lovely on paper, right? And it sounds fascinating, and that, what a different world you're in all of a sudden. But the complication is then, what sort of a society do you need in order to be able to wheel this stuff out? Because what kind of creeps are you going to be having who will go and learn this stuff and develop these skills in themselves and then just put themselves in women's bedrooms, right? Or whatever. These sorts of things, right? The potential for misusing these sorts of human skills and abilities is endless. Endless, right? So in order to be able to safely, as safely as you could, teach and develop these skills, you need to be pretty sure that the people that are around and in this world are of as close to pristine in morality as possible. So if you need that from each individual, what sort of society do you have? What sort of society do you need? What sort of government do you need to be able to, I suppose, assure the fact that we're only allowing morally sophisticated, morally pristine enough people around? Then you start hitting the eugenics heavy, right? Which we do naturally as well. We all want to have children with the better looking, more intelligent person, right? That's eugenics. We all do it. It's a natural thing. But then do we lean very, very heavy into genetic modification of human beings, right? In order to try and cultivate a higher form of morality, right? A cleaner form of morality. So it's fascinating stuff. And that's just an addendum to the Trump thing, right? But there are big conversations that are needed here, and to a degree we're seeing a lot of them unfold. So we take the positives where we can, and if Trump serves nothing else, if he is totally evil and he's part of the Dark Lord system and all that stuff, and he's there to manipulate you, okay, that just still leaves us in the same position we are anyway, right? Because unless you're looking for a god or you're looking for a hero, right? Because you'd be let down eternally. Eternally. No man is another man's hero. He can't be, right? So if the benefit that we have from Trump is that this whole system allowed society to rot and decay so much that 1% better than the dirt that we've been living in for the last few years would be seen as victory, then fine. We accept the fact that we were brought back to some sort of homeostasis, right? Some sort of way of seeing the world that was more natural to us, take 30 years ago or whatever, 40 years ago even. So we'll accept the fact that he's brought us back there. And now we need to build on that, right? We need to build on that ourselves. We need to get smart. We need to understand things. And we need to get hopeful in the idea that better days can be brought in, right? And we don't need to piggyback on anybody to make life more livable for ourselves, right? We can do that in and of ourselves and for ourselves, right? So whatever, I leave you with that.